All right, guys, welcome back. It's good to see you guys all again. I hope you're having a great day out there. Let's talk about a little about what we talked about last week. All right, we took a look at a particular guy who's been dead for a long time, but his music really matters, and that's of course Ludwig van Beethoven. So we took a look at it, and of course we asked the important question: should this guy really matter as much in music history as Beethoven does? And I really hope that you guys were able to come up with a little bit of an idea about that last week. Now, maybe not a fully developed idea, but maybe at least some sort of a value you could decide. Of course, for me, I personally agree that Beethoven really matters. But this week, we're going to take a look at another person who his music might not be as well known or well famous to the average listener. But in the world of music, he cannot be understated. In this guy's name this week, we're going to take a look at Johann Sebastian Bach. Now, who is Bach? This name gets thrown around quite a bit. You may not be as familiar with his name as you are with maybe Beethoven's name. But in the world of music, we could not possibly have a Beethoven without Bach. So we're going to take a look at this guy today and see what is his legacy and why does he matter so much to the history of music. So Johann Sebastian Bach, the J is pronounced a little different. This guy's obviously not from the United States. He was born in the town of Eisenach in what is modern day Germany back in 1685. Now, Germany did not exist back then. Actually, at the time, it was a bunch of like small, sort of like state situations that were governed by princes and dukes. This is before we had organized government like we have today. It was kind of just like, here's my land and there's your land. The people who were in charge of it were kind of royalty and they were rich. That's really an important factor that gives us an idea of how life was like back then, to give us some context to the life we're going to be talking about today. So Bach was born into a musical family. Luckily for him, his father was kind of in charge of a lot of the local musicians. He was surrounded by people playing music all the time growing up, which of course is a really special thing because this is a time period before you had radio, before you had any sort of recordings to listen to whatsoever. If you wanted to hear music, you had to have someone either singing in front of you or playing an instrument in front of you for you to hear it. There were no YouTube, Spotify, CDs, cassette tapes, none of that. There was no way for any of that to happen. So really, Bach was hearing music on a level like many of us today would experience it, where it was quite easily accessible to him, which for us may be kind of easy with all the options we have with YouTube and Spotify, but back then really was unusual for him to have that. So he was really lucky. Now, of course, being in a very musical family, Bach started playing music at a young age. But Bach's father died when he was still fairly young, and he had to go live with his brother. Now, as bad as that may sound, it's very sad. He actually learned quite a bit from living with his brother. His brother really was able to teach him a lot of the tricks of the trade with music and ways to perform music, how to write music, copy music, kind of learn all the ins and outs and the nuts and bolts of what made music kind of work. Now, Bach would take all of this and come up with his own ideas later on in life that really would change the game forever in music with a system we still use today. Now, to give you some context of this time period, this was a little about 70 years after the life of William Shakespeare, the famous playwright. It was around the same time as the scientist Isaac Newton and the founding fathers of the United States, like George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, and all those guys that were over here setting up our country. Now, after having learned the way his brother kind of showed him with music, it was almost like he was learning a new language, which is really what music is in a lot of senses of it. You have to kind of learn a way to be able to speak it. It's not like you listen to one person speak a language and all of a sudden you know it. Music's like the same thing. It takes practice and just kind of getting there, finding your way in and out, finding what you're comfortable with, what gives you a hard time, and eventually you can kind of express yourself a little more clearly, just like we are with words. Now, after having developed some of his skills with the help of his brother, Bach was able to land a scholarship for singing to a well-known boarding school nearby at the time, which was able to put him around some very wealthy individuals' children. So he was able to make some kind of rich friends. Now, while he was there, he was also able to play what the school had was what we call a pipe organ, which looks like this. Now, this, of course, is a bit of a predecessor to the modern day piano and keyboard. It really completely functions completely differently. The way it works is you actually, when you press down the keys, there's actually air valves that will take air, compressed air in a tank that you have to pump up and blow the air up tubes that are kind of like a single note flute for each key. Now, it takes a lot of these pipes and a lot of pumped air to make this instrument work. Bach would also pick up the violin along with his singing, and his skills got to be so well rounded that he was actually picked up by one of the dukes of the nearby Weimar, which is one of the states that we were talking about earlier, and was recruited to be a court musician for the duke. Now, what does that mean, a court musician? Basically, anytime the royalty of the area has a get-together, a party, some sort of a function, they want to have musicians play music, because remember, we did not have recordings of music back then, so you needed live musicians, and you wanted good ones at that. I mean, if you were a king or a prince or a duke, you wanted to be able to show off, be like, look at my people, they're the best. So Bach was recruited by this duke to go play for the court for him, where he was able to be paid to play music and, more importantly, to start writing some music. Now, with the duke, obviously Bach entered at the bottom of the totem pole. He kind of had to do a bit of like the cleanup jobs when he first got there. But he was given the role of being able to work on the organ, which he very much enjoyed, and was able to really build up his skills, a big passion for the organ, and also direct the choir. But he felt this choir was just so bad that he just kind of got up and left his job and just said, I'm going off to get better at what I do. Bach wanted to take a trip to visit a guy by the name of Buxtehude, who was a super organ player at the time. To go visit him, he had to take a journey of about 260 miles to get there. In the best part, Bach walked this whole trip. He basically just left his job and walked 260 miles to go visit this organ player and learn from him. Now, upon returning, the Duke actually surprisingly did not fire Bach for walking out on his job and taking a month-long journey to go visit some organ player. Instead, he actually commended Bach for actually wanting to learn and be able to improve his craft. And so he promoted Bach to be the director of all the music for his court musicians, which really gave Bach a great opportunity to work with the finest musicians that he could around him at the time in this area and be able to write music for them. So his compositional skills of being able to write his own music really started to take off at this point. He was spending a lot of time working on the organ and would start to write some music that really started to change the world. Perhaps one of the first really notable pieces of music that Bach was able to write was a system of music called the well-tempered clavier, which was designed to be able to play with a new approach to tuning, picking the notes that we use. Basically, helped us set up the notes that we use today on the piano and most of Western Hemisphere music. The well-tempered clavier would have songs in all 12 keys, which, of course, if you guys think back, we have 7 white keys on the keyboard, and we have 5 black keys on the keyboard. Remember that chromatic scale we talked about? There's 12 different tones in all of music. And Bach would write pieces basically as an exercise at each different key. Basically, a song for the key of C, a song for C sharp, a song for D, G sharp, F, and so on. These were as much a bit of a exercise in music to kind of get practice, but the results of them started to really define what we call today as tonal music. They built a system of harmony that people to this day will study in school if they want to go into music. If you actually learn to play a musical instrument, you will likely have to, at some point, learn the theoretical guts to what make music work. And that traces straight back to what Bach did in the well-tempered clavier. Let's take a listen to part of it. Now, this name, what a clavier is basically a type of keyboard instrument that's something like a predecessor to the modern day piano, because not everybody was able to have a pipe organ. That was a very expensive and huge instrument. I mean, they would take up an entire room of a building. And it was kind of like looked at as like the modern day electric guitar. It was like the super cool instrument back then. All right, guys, we'll come back together here for part 2 in a little bit. We're running out of time, so I'll see you in a little while.